In 1997, a quiet man from rural Washington called into a late-night radio show. He wasn't selling anything. He wasn't looking for fame. He just had a question nobody could answer. On his property, there was a hole in the ground, and no matter what he threw into it, furniture, appliances, old tires, it never filled up. He dropped a fishing line down, then another, over 15 miles of line, nothing. No sound, no echo, no bottom. Within weeks of that phone call, his land was surrounded by military personnel. His bank account was emptied, and Mel Waters was never heard from again. Welcome to the Veiled One. The hole had always been there. That's the first thing that gets you. Mel's neighbors couldn't remember a time without it. Generations of locals had used it as a dump. Broken tools, dead livestock, anything they needed gone. The hole took everything and gave nothing back. And yet, it never filled. Not once. Not even close. No splash, no thud, no echo. Whatever went in simply disappeared into silence. Mel Waters lived near Ellensburg, Washington, on a stretch of land along Manistash Ridge. Quiet, rural, the kind of place where neighbors are far apart and questions go unasked. The hole sat in the middle of his property, roughly 9 feet wide, ringed by a stone retaining wall that dropped about 15 feet before disappearing into darkness. It looked like a well. It behaved like nothing anyone had ever seen. Animals avoided it completely. Dogs refused to go near it, no matter how hard their owners tried. No birds flew over it. No insects gathered around it. The area around the hole was completely, unnaturally still. Mel was a fisherman, so when he decided to measure the depth, he used what he had: fishing line, a 1-pound weight, and patience. He dropped the line. It kept going. He attached more spools. It kept going. By the time he ran out of line, he had sent over 80,000 feet into the hole, more than 15 miles, still no bottom. He tried a second test, attaching a roll of candy to check for moisture. If there was water below, the candy would dissolve. When he pulled it back up, it was completely dry. For comparison, the deepest artificial hole ever drilled, the Kola Super Deep Borehole in Russia, reached about 7.5 miles. It took 2 decades of continuous drilling and had to stop because the underground heat was destroying the equipment. That was a state-funded program using industrial machinery. Mel's hole, if his measurements were even close to accurate, went twice as deep. And nobody built it. Nobody drilled it. It was just there. Then one of Mel's neighbors told him something that changed the entire story. His dog had died, and he'd done what people in rural areas sometimes do. He threw the body into the hole. A few days later, the dog came back. Not a similar dog. His dog. Same collar, same markings, running through the tree line near the property as if nothing had happened. But when the neighbor called out, the dog didn't respond. It moved through the woods like it didn't recognize him, like something had come back wearing the shape of what was lost, but not the thing itself. Mel needed someone to take this seriously. In 1997, there was really only one place for that: Coast to Coast AM, a late-night radio show with 10 million listeners across hundreds of stations. On February 21st, 1997, Mel called in. His voice was calm, measured. He wasn't performing. He was genuinely confused. looking for someone who could explain what he was dealing with. The response was immediate. Millions of people were now aware of the hole. Researchers, skeptics, and the simply curious all started paying attention. And so, apparently, did someone with considerably more resources. The day after his first broadcast, Mel returned to his property. The road was blocked. Military vehicles, armed personnel, heavy machinery had been brought in overnight, leaving deep tracks across the earth. He was told there had been a plane crash nearby, but there was no wreckage, no smoke, no local news coverage, no police report. Nothing that would explain why armed men were standing on his land. When Mel pushed back, a man in civilian clothes made things very clear. The land wasn't necessarily his anymore, and if he caused problems, reasons could be found to make his life very difficult. He threatened to go to the press. The man told him, "Go ahead, nobody will believe you." He was wrong about that, but he wasn't wrong about what came next. Before he lost access, Mel had noticed other things about the hole, things harder to explain than depth. Plants grew unusually fast near it. Radios picked up strange signals, not just static, but actual broadcasts, coherent ones. One day, tuning a radio near the hole, Mel picked up a baseball game. When he traced the broadcast, it matched a game played in 1967, 30 years earlier. Callers to the show offered theories: a ley line, a time portal, a thin place where something underneath could reach through. Nobody had an answer, but everyone had a feeling. An elderly neighbor mentioned that years ago, there had been stone columns arranged around the hole. They had collapsed over time. Nobody knew who built them, or when, or why someone had gone to the trouble. Mel was offered a deal, a sum of money, a place to live, a clean exit, in exchange for leaving the country and never speaking about the hole again. He took it, and then he was gone. His phone line went silent. Letters came back unopened. His home was cleaned out completely. Not abandoned, erased. Not a single personal item remained. Satellite images of the Manistash Ridge area began showing a blurred, pixelated rectangle exactly where his property had been. The kind of deliberate censorship normally applied to classified military sites. That area remains obscured in multiple public satellite databases. No official explanation has ever been given, not once. Years later, Mel resurfaced briefly. He said a Native American community in Nevada had reached out. They had found another hole on their land. Same diameter, same silence, but this one was lined with metal, not stone, and it radiated heat. The metal wouldn't vibrate or make sound. Mel accidentally dropped a tool on it, and the impact was completely silent. They lowered a sheep into it as a test. When they brought it back up, it was dead, cooked from the inside, its organs deformed in ways that made no anatomical sense. Inside the body, they found something that hadn't been there before. Mel described it as resembling a seal, but it had human eyes. It crawled to the edge of the table and dropped back into the hole. Mel had arrived in Nevada with a terminal diagnosis: advanced cancer. 6 months to live. After this experience, his follow-up tests showed nothing. The cancer was gone. He believed something in that hole had changed him in ways medicine couldn't explain. He called into the show one final time. In 2002, his voice was different, hesitant, uncertain, like a man unsure of his own memory. He said He'd lost weeks he couldn't account for. He said there were things he wasn't sure he was allowed to say. Then, just before the break, he said there are other holes all over the world. This is only the beginning. When the show came back, the line was dead. He never called again. No death certificate, no property transfer, no forwarding address. Mel Waters, as a recorded human being, simply stopped existing. So here's where we land. A hole with no bottom. A dog that came back wrong. A government that showed up overnight without explanation. And a man who disappeared after asking one question nobody wanted answered. Maybe it was a hoax. Maybe Mel was a gifted storyteller who kept a lie running for 5 years without ever profiting from it. No book, no merchandise, no interviews for money. Or maybe the silence was always the point. Some things don't echo because they aren't meant to be heard. What do you think was at the bottom? Leave it in the comments. And if you want to keep pulling at threads like this, subscribe. There's a lot more that doesn't add up.